Am I good enough? Am I good enough? This is the question of our day today. Am I good enough? You know, before I was the pastor here at Westwinds Church, a lot of you know this, but we moved here from Portland, Oregon, my family and I, and we were in Portland, Oregon, doing something that church people call church planting. It's a way to talk about how churches are started. Portland, Oregon is one of the most unchurched cities in America, and so it would be almost a decade ago now, my wife and I and some others moved to Portland, Oregon to try and start a church. And the data would show that Portland, Oregon is where you go if you want to fail at starting a church, okay? The churches that have been tried to start there in the last 20 years primarily have failed, and churches are closing there at an alarming rate, but we thought, you know what? We're gonna give this a try. And our little church plant, it failed. It didn't make it. Now, we could not have predicted a global pandemic, but this church that we had started, that started in homes, gathered around tables and living rooms, when the pandemic hit and we couldn't gather together in homes anymore, slowly but surely over about 2 years, our little church just kind of dwindled away. And maybe the part of that I've been even reckoning with in this season of life is kind of dealing with what that has meant for me emotionally. You know, when we went to Portland and then we were kind of getting this church started, I knew the data. Like, I knew that it was a really unlikely scenario statistically that this church would work. I knew that churches were failing there at a quite alarming rate. And then when it didn't work, when our church plant kind of dwindled away, people like consoled me a ton, right? Like, hey, like, you couldn't have predicted this pandemic. Like, it's okay. Like, you know, like this was not, everything was going really great until that happened, you know? Or like, hey, it's okay. Like, you know, it's a really, really tough city to start a church in. And while those things were maybe helpful for me on the surface, the deeper conversation I was having in my soul was actually about me and feeling like I wasn't good enough. See, because here's the truth. I'm a little arrogant. And as we were going out to Portland, I knew all of those stats. And I thought, yeah, but those folks who tried to start those churches weren't me. They weren't as good at teaching as I am. They weren't as good as communicating the gospel in common terms as I am. They weren't as strong relationally as I am. They weren't as strategic as I'm going to be. And so when our church died, what was going on inside of me was actually a conversation of like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe I'm not good enough. There was even a part of me that felt like this thing was going to succeed because God owed me. Like, I had done a really good job at giving my life to God up to that point for almost 15 years. I mean, I was like a faithful servant since I was like 15 years old. And I felt like inside of me, like, man, like I just think that like, and this is bad theology, right? But like that I'd earned a little bit of God karma. And that in the eyes of God, I was good enough. And that God would bless me with being the chosen one who finally got a church across the line in Portland, Oregon. Today's question, am I good enough, is actually a question that finds its roots in shame. It finds its roots in shame. And man, like there's something even about that word that just, I don't know if you felt a stir in your gut, right? Like when I say the word shame. Do you feel it? Like it's so difficult for us to kind of talk about and process shame. Because many of us, I think a lot of us have ways of like hiding shame or pushing shame down. So what we experience is maybe like outside of dealing with shame in our lives. But all of it's like a veneer or layers of protection to keep us from addressing shame. You know, for me, I hide my shame behind performance. I can perform and perform and perform to keep me from maybe dealing with shame. For some of us, we hide our shame behind perfectionism. You know, like if I just do it right, I'll be okay. Some of us, we hide our shame behind people pleasing. You know, if they approve of me, of this, then I'll be okay. Some of us, we hide our shame behind comparison. Well, at least I'm not as bad as they are, you know? We hide our shame behind comparison. Some of us, we hide our shame by trying to be unseen, right? If I could just stay unseen, then I won't risk being rejected. Some of us, we hide our shame behind religious performance. If I could just improve, God would accept me or accept me more. I also think when we talk about shame in church, we've got to do a little bit of distilling here, separating out the differences between shame and I'll use the word guilt. Now, depending on kind of your upbringing, this word guilt can mean different things. For some of us, what I'm describing here is guilt. Some of us maybe grew up in a world where we refer to that sense as conviction, feeling convicted about something, right? And often what happens is in the church, those two things become really intertwined. And they shouldn't be. You know, conviction or guilt says I did something wrong. But shame says something is wrong with me. You hear the difference there? See, conviction can lead us to repentance. Conviction can lead us to repentance. Guilt can even lead us to repentance. But what shame does is shame leads us to hide. See why the separation is so important here. Conviction says, I need forgiveness. Shame says, I need to disappear. And this is why trying harder never answers this question, am I good enough? Trying harder is no anecdote. It doesn't heal our shame. It doesn't deal with our shame. Trying harder will continually lead us to failing to deal with our shame. See, shame says I don't just need forgiveness or I don't just need reconciliation. It's not that I don't just need healing. Shame says I need to stop being me, or I need to disappear, or I need to be remade completely, and that seems impossible. This is actually the tragedy in the story of Judas. Do you know Judas? Judas was one of Jesus' disciples. He was one of the 12 who spent about 3 years being discipled by Jesus. But Judas is the one at the end of his story who turns Jesus in to the governing officials who wanted Jesus to be crucified. Judas sold Jesus out, literally sold him out. He took money to show them where Jesus was. And it begins the story of Jesus' brutal death. And Judas, after the fact, kind of realizes what he did. And in the story, Judas takes his own life. And if you've been reading the story of Jesus, what you should read in that moment is that that's a tragedy. That if you get to the moment of Judas taking his own life, and anywhere in your psyche is, well, that's what he deserved, or that's what he should do, then I would say go back to the beginning of the Gospels and read again because you've missed something. Judas taking his own life in this moment is a tragedy. It's a tragedy because shame convinced him that what he needed or what God would want for him is that he would be eliminated. Jesus actually deals with shame and conviction or shame and guilt quite often throughout the Gospels. One of the kind of clearer pictures of this is a story that is often referred to as the woman caught in adultery. I think that's actually a terrible name for that story. It's not in the Bible. People added that name later because it's not what the story is about. But we often know it as the story called the woman caught in adultery. See, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. And people of the day, religious leaders of the day, and people pulled her into the streets to be stoned, to be people to throw rocks at her. And they bring her to Jesus, and they say, Jesus, the law says that we should stone her, that this act of adultery is punishable by public stoning. What do you think we should do, Jesus? And with the crowds around, he looks at this woman and he looks at the crowds and he stops and thinks for a minute. And he says to them, whichever of you have not sinned, you should cast the first stone. Whichever of you have not sinned, you should cast the first stone. This word sin is another like kind of theological word. It quite literally in the Bible, it's like an archery word. It's like you're lining up to take a shot at a target and you miss the point. You miss what you're aiming for, right? Sin is to like miss the mark of what God intended us to be and live. And Jesus says in this moment that those of you who have not sinned should be the ones to cast the first stone. Brilliant move, right? Slowly, people start dropping the rocks from their hands and walking away. And he says to the woman, who is still here to condemn you? And she looks around. She says, no one. And Jesus says to her, then neither do I condemn you. He separates here shame and guilt. Now, I think again, like you could read this story, right? And if at this point of the story you're thinking like, yeah, like she deserves to be punished for what she's done, you've probably still missed the point of the story. You've probably missed the point of the story. Now, what I don't think Jesus is doing here is suggesting that, like go ahead, like sleep around, like cheat on your partners, like break commitments you've made to people. I don't think that's the point of the story either. But you know what I've found in years of being a pastor is that people who are longing to take steps towards Jesus, I've yet to, and maybe I will encounter this sometime. I don't know that I'll say this directly. I've never encountered somebody who's longing to take steps towards Jesus, wants to take steps towards Jesus, and I need to convince them that they need to be forgiven or reconciled or healed. I've never had to do that. Actually, the harder pastoral work has been convincing them that their identity is not all wrapped up in what they have done so that they might receive forgiveness or healing or reconciliation. See, here's what we need to learn from Jesus, is that systems categorize people by what they've done. Jesus never does. Systems categorize people by what they've done. Systems never do. Jesus never does. A system looks at somebody who breaks the law, and a system now categorizes them as a law breaker. A system looks at somebody who has committed adultery in this story and now categorizes them as an adulterer. I'll go big here. A system looks at somebody who has even gone as far as to commit murder, and now they are categorized as a murderer. Jesus doesn't do this. He doesn't participate in systems of shame that tie people's identity to the things they've done. But Jesus invites people to hear his words, I don't condemn you. Now let's have a conversation about how you might receive forgiveness or healing or reconciliation. One of the most beautiful stories that Jesus shares in the Gospels is this story found in Luke chapter 15. It's a story of this father who has a great estate, like this large farm and this whole ecosystem that his family has built up over generations. And this father has two sons. So someday this farm, this estate will be split between these two sons when that father dies. One of the sons comes to the father in this story in Luke chapter 15 and says, Dad, I want my half now. Now, in this time, that would have been, would have been really offensive. What the son is saying to the father is, I don't want you, I want your stuff, right? Like, I am looking forward to the day that you're no longer here so I can have my half of the inheritance. And in the story, the father, with great heartbreak, honors his son's wishes and says, all right, you can have your half. And to kind of reveal the deeper point of what's going on in the son's heart, the son takes his half and he leaves the father. And the story says he goes off to a land far away. And he goes off into a land far away, and he spends all of the money. He wastes it all. He just parties and has a great time and lives a lavish life, and then all the money is gone, and he's got nothing left. And he's trying to survive by working on someone else's farm in these faraway lands. And the story says that the son hit such rock bottom that he began to desire the food of the pigs on the farm he was working at. He wanted to just eat what they were eating. That's how hungry and far off he was. I'm gonna pick this story up in Luke chapter 15. This son, this is what he says in this moment of rock bottom. He says, I'll get up and go to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Take me on as one of your hired hands. This is what imagine him in this moment. I don't know if you've ever had to have a hard conversation where you were way in the wrong and you weren't quite sure how the person you had to go have this conversation with was going to respond. I don't know if you've ever had to apologize for something you've done that's really hurt somebody else. And I don't know if you're like me, you probably are in this, right? You play that conversation out in your head 1,000 times. You've got it dialed in, right? I know exactly, okay, I'm gonna say these words when I get there, and I think maybe if I say it this way, then they'll be able to hear me, and I really hope they can hear me. I wanna make sure I say this the right way. Can you imagine the son in this moment, right? Rehearsing these words over and over and over again. Said, Father, I've sinned against heaven, against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. That's the word. I'm going to let my dad know that I recognize that because of what I've done, I'm not worthy to be called his son. And I think what I'm going to ask dad is Dad, I'm not asking for you to receive me as your son. I actually just want a lower status in the family. If I could just come back and work for you. I just want to be an employee. I don't need my inheritance. I don't need to be owed everything when this is all done. I'm just going to, I get it, Dad. I screwed this up. I'm not worthy to be your son. Can I just work for you in the business? Because I need a job, Dad. Imagine the long walk back to his father's house as he's replaying this and replaying this and replaying this. Mike Foster, in this book, The 7 Primal Questions, and he sits with this question, right? Am I good enough? He says this, the biggest bully in a Q6's life, so Q6s are people who are asking this question. This is question 6. of 7 that we are walking through. The biggest bully in a Q6's life is their own inner voice. Their brain cruelly serves up a non-stop shame storm. It creates a deep-seated feeling that something is wrong with them. They are hopelessly flawed, unworthy, unlovable. I mean, can you see this in the boy in this story? What I love is how Jesus tells this story. In Luke 15, the story picks up back at the farm with the father. It says this in Luke 15, verse 20, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was moved with compassion. I mean, can you just picture the dad, right? As his son has been gone for an undisclosed amount of time. We don't know how long in the story. And every day, probably at some point, he steps out on the deck and looks across the field where one day he watched his son walk away with the inheritance, hoping that today is the day that he might be able to see his son come back across that field. I mean, those of you who are parents get this, right? You imagine just every day he kind of does that check with his morning coffee. Like, is he coming? Man, no. But on this day, he says, while the son was a long way off, his father saw him, was moved with compassion, and ran to him, hugged him, and kissed him. Like, so good, son. I'm so glad you are home. But then in the story, there's this word, then. This is where the story gets really good. This then is so important in the story. He says, then the father said to his servants, the father called for his employees. The father said to his servants, quickly, bring out the best robe, put it on him, put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Are you catching this in the story? The son never even had a chance to give his speech. He didn't even have a chance to speak those words to his father, I'm unworthy, because his dad met him in the field that day. From a long way off, his father saw him. He says, I don't need to hear this shameful talk. He embraces him and holds him. He never even addresses the question that his son wants to know, can I just be a servant here on your farm? Instead, he restores him to family status immediately. Now, we might not pick up on this nowadays, right? But that robe, the robe, it represents in the story belonging, that this son is back where he belongs. The ring on his finger would have been like a family ring. It would represent this authority in the family, that his family identity has been restored to him. And even putting sandals on his feet in this time, like servants on a farm, they went barefoot. And people who ran the place wore sandals. No, son, you're not coming here as a servant on this farm, not a slave on this farm. You are my son. Mike Foster goes on in the story talking about Q6, as he says, a Q6 often needs, this is so good, y'all, often needs an authentic encounter with grace to unlock their primal truth, that I am good enough. I'm going to say that again. A Q6 often needs an authentic encounter with grace to unlock their primal truth. I am good enough. The loving acceptance of their imperfections by others is transformative. Their loving acceptance of their imperfections is transformative. An authentic encounter with grace. I mean, this is the story over and over and over again. That the way we deal with shame in our souls is vulnerability met with grace. It's vulnerability met with grace. Now, vulnerability, that is petrifying to the shame in our souls. Sometimes in the wrong community or in the wrong place or around the wrong kinds of people, being vulnerable around our shame is damning. It's not safe. But Jesus gives us this story, that vulnerability around shame, when it's met with grace, is healing and restorative and leads us to forgiveness. When our church ended in Portland, I had this colleague, her name is Un, and we were starting churches in different places around the same time. She was in Hawaii, that's gotta be tough, and I was in Portland, and throughout this journey of trying to think about how do we start churches in new places in different ways, I've been part of this community of leaders actually, and one of the pieces when our church plant finished, one of the areas I felt shameful, I didn't feel good enough, was around my colleagues, because I was the one who didn't succeed. And so much of our relationship had been around working on these different ways of starting churches together. I was really nervous actually to talk to others that were doing this work and had been doing this work alongside of me for 6, 7, 8 years. And I'd written this letter to our community telling them that we were going to be done with our church and that Corey and I and our family were going to move back to Michigan, where she's from. And I asked Un if I could read it to her first so she could give me some feedback. And we got on Zoom and I read the letter and I got like 4 lines in and I just began to weep and weep and weep. I could just feel shame inside of my body. It was so present inside of me, just so bound up, And I got through the letter and she told me how great it was and I should just go ahead and it's gonna be okay. And I went and read it to our community and I wept again, because I was worried about rejection from them and all that. They'd given so much to this and here I am failing them. And it was a week later that Un sent Corey and I a message. And she said, hey, why don't you guys just come to Hawaii? Come, and if you get here, I'll take care of everything else. And reluctantly we went, And I remember when we got to Hawaii and on Thursdays I practice my sermon in front of people to make sure I'm not gonna say anything too heretical. And I wept Thursday in front of the 5 people hearing my sermon telling this story. It still hits me. I remember when we got to Hawaii and we had rented a car and we got to her house and we dropped our bags and she said, hey, everybody get into the van. We're going to the beach, And so we drove a whole 3 minutes and got to the most beautiful beach I've ever seen in my life, And we got to the beach and my kids just immediately beelined for the water. Actually, my kids and my wife beelined immediately for the water. And I just sat down on the beach because I hate water. And Un had with her this little cooler. She reached in the cooler and she handed me a beer. Vulnerability met with grace, And that beer on the beach was the beginning of a healing process for me, of letting go of this shame that I was holding on to. Am I good enough? It's the wrong question. I am good enough. And do I have conviction? Do I have things that I do? Do I have sins that need to be forgiven? Do I have reconciliations that need to happen? Do I have healing that has to happen in my life? Absolutely, I do. But if I allow shame to hang on to those things, if I allow shame to keep me all bound up, I'll never become everything that God has called and created me to be. Actually, this is why the church has these practices that they've been doing for thousands of years. Today, we're going to finish our gathering by taking communion. And it doesn't actually matter what church tradition you come from. Communion across all traditions. Now, there's all kinds of disagreements on how we do it and what it means and blah, 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 blah. But across all church traditions, this act of communion or Eucharist is called a means of grace. A means of grace. What does that mean? What we all agree on is that Jesus promises to be uniquely present at his table when we take communion together. And what I love about this table is it's a picture of vulnerability met with grace. We take the bread remembering Jesus' body, which was broken for us. And we drink the wine. For us, it's grape juice so that everyone can participate. And we take a drink of it to remember Jesus' blood that was shed for us. I don't think there's a more vulnerable picture in all of human history than Jesus' crucifixion. Vulnerability met with grace. Next weekend, we're gonna baptize some people. This is another means of grace. Baptism is another means of grace the church has referred to. By the way, if you want to get baptized, we can have a conversation about that. The tank will be here next weekend. But is there anything more vulnerable than getting into that water in front of a group of people, getting put under the water, and it doesn't matter, right, how nice your makeup was before that, or how dolled up your hair was before that? All of us come out of that water looking absolutely ridiculous, right? It is a vulnerable moment to be baptized in front of a group of people. But in that moment, it is a means of grace that we experience as a community, that Jesus promises to be uniquely present with us when we baptize one another in the name of the Father and the Son in the Holy Spirit. Vulnerability met with grace is how we answer this question, am I good enough? And when that happens, the answer to that question is yes, I am good enough. That my shame does not define who I am. The things that I've done can be forgiven. The relationships I've broken can be reconciled. The wounds in my soul can be healed. And nothing in me can keep me from that because of what Jesus has invited us into.